an opportunity for both sides to ask their questions, to express their views, and to address all of the issues that are raised by a Supreme Court nomination. It speaks well that even in this highly contentious, highly partisan time, that our colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle have consistently praised your leadership of this committee, and I certainly join in that praise.
Thank you.
Much of the criticism that the Democratic senators on this committee have raised about Judge Gorsuch has focused on a handful of cases and particular litigants who are sympathetic litigants, and focusing on which litigant prevailed. And I want to take a moment to discuss the relationship of process to results. Conservatives and liberals have a different view about the process by which courts should arrive upon their decisions. Conservatives understand that it is the role of a judge, and especially the role of a Supreme Court justice, simply to follow the law, to apply the Constitution, to apply the Bill of Rights, to apply statutes passed by Congress and signed into law by the President. Liberals, on the other hand, by and large, view the process as achieving the result that they want, view the process of adjudicating a case as a political process. Now, there is a consequence of those two processes, because I will say there is an issue at stake here about which principle prevails, and it's a results issue. In many cases, you have a conflict between government and individual liberty. And for a liberal judge who is engaged in results-oriented judging, the outcome of that choice is almost always siding with government. It is a support of government power at the expense of individual liberty. On the other hand, for those who would follow the law and follow the Constitution, in a great many instances, individual liberty will and should prevail over government power. And the reason is simple. The Constitution has a bias towards liberty. If you are following the Constitution and Bill of Rights, you are following a document that was created to protect individual liberty. So, for example, on free speech, those on the left that want results-oriented liberals on the court view free speech often as an inconvenience, and given a choice between government power and an individual's right to speak in a political context, will consistently side with government power to muzzle the free speech of individual citizens. That is profoundly inconsistent, I believe, with the First Amendment to the Constitution. Likewise, the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. If you have a liberal, results-oriented judge who believes in restricting guns, believes in restricting individual liberty to keep and bear arms, then that outcome will be siding with government and the power to take away your right to defend yourself, to defend your family, to defend your home. On the other hand, the Constitution, if you're following the Bill of Rights, has a bias towards individual liberty. The Second Amendment explicitly protects the individual liberty to keep and bear arms, to protect your family, to protect your life and your loved ones. Likewise, when it comes to religious liberty, if a judge is a liberal, results-oriented judge, then religious liberty is seen as an inconvenience, a minor impediment standing in the way of unfettered government authority. On the other hand, if you have a judge committed to following the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, then the First Amendment's protection of religious liberty is fundamental and must be protected. You know, it is interesting, some of my Democratic friends have asked Judge Gorsuch if he would be willing to stand up to President Trump. I'll tell you, any constitutionalist who is following the law is by definition willing to stand up to a president of either party, including the president who appointed him, if that president or that administration exceeds constitutional authority. In my view, and I think the view of the senators on this side of the aisle, we are not confirming a political player. We are not confirming someone who will simply vote with our team on a given issue. And if this president or the next president or the next president contravenes the Constitution and Bill of Rights, contravenes the individual rights of citizens, then I have every hope and expectation that Judge Gorsuch and any other constitutionalist would without hesitation side with the law over government power. That connection between process and results is very real. And this nomination is unusual in the annals of history. It is unusual because the presidential election was in many ways a referendum on this nomination. The vacancy occurred last year in the midst of a presidential election season, in the midst of the primaries. And the Senate majority, quite rightly, I believe, concluded that we would not fill the vacancy in the middle of a presidential election. Rather, we would allow the people to decide what sort of justice would fill this seat. And President Trump did an unprecedented step. He laid out a list of 21 specific nominees, and he promised the American people he would nominate from that list. I am not aware of any president in history who has done the same thing, who has laid out for the American people, these are the specific individuals from which I will choose this nominee. Judge Gorsuch was one of those 21. The American people, in going to vote in November, knew specifically the individuals who would be considered, and they knew a very different vision that Hillary Clinton promised. Hillary Clinton promised to nominate liberal judicial activists who would undermine free speech, who would undermine the Second Amendment, who would undermine religious liberty. And in November of last year, the American people had a choice. This was a referendum on Justice Scalia's vacancy. And the result of this election, I believe, was an overwhelming mandate for a justice who will protect our individual liberties, who will follow the Constitution, who will follow the Bill of Rights, who will follow the law. Given that the American people had the opportunity to vote and choose which path the court should go, I believe that confers upon this nomination a kind of super legitimacy, where it is not just the president's nomination, but it is the president's nomination validated by the choice of the American people exercised at the ballot box. Now, given that, why is it that our friends on the Democratic side of the aisle are so unified in their opposition? In fact, unified to the point of promising an unprecedented filibuster of a Supreme Court justice. Well, the reason is not the merits. There is no credible argument that can be given that Judge Gorsuch is anything but impeccably qualified to serve on the Supreme Court. Columbia undergraduate, Harvard Law School, Oxford, clerking for Justice Byron White, who I note was appointed to the court by John F. Kennedy, serving a decade as a distinguished federal court of appeals judge. On the merits, Judge Gorsuch is indisputably qualified, and that's the reason why we've seen a litany of liberals testifying to Judge Gorsuch's merits. Neil Katyal, the former acting Solicitor General for President Obama, wrote that Judge Gorsuch was, quote, one of the most thoughtful and brilliant judges to have served our nation over the last century. Quote, as those of us who have worked with him can attest, he is a wonderfully decent and humane person. Those are the words of President Obama's former acting Solicitor General. Norm Eisen, President Obama's former ethics czar, was a classmate of Judge Gorsuch's at Harvard. Eisen joined a letter with 57 Harvard Law School classmates stating that, quote, we unanimously believe Neil possesses the exemplary character, outstanding intellect, steady temperament, humility, and open-mindedness to be an excellent addition to the United States Supreme Court. That is from President Obama's former ethics czar. David Frederick, a former law partner of Judge Gorsuch, a progressive Democrat, a board member of the American Constitution Society, the left-wing equivalent of the Federalist Society. What did he have to say? Quote, "The Senate should confirm him because there is no principled reason to vote no." That's not a conservative saying that. That is a well-known liberal. Or for that matter, Judge Gorsuch's hometown newspaper, the Denver Post, which I might note endorsed Hillary Clinton in the presidential election. It is not a conservative newspaper, but here's what the Denver Post said. Quote, "We hope the Senate manages to place him on the high court in short order. Gorsuch is a brilliant legal mind and talented writer whom observers praise for his ability to apply the law fairly and consistently. We appreciate his desire to strictly interpret the Constitution based on the intent of our nation's founders, even when those rulings might contradict his personal beliefs." On the merits, this decision would be easy indeed. If this were being decided on the merits, Judge Gorsuch would be confirmed 100-0. And we don't have to speculate about that because he has been. A decade ago in the Court of Appeals, the Senate confirmed him by voice vote, which means not a single Democrat spoke out against his confirmation. Not Senator Feinstein, not Senator Leahy, not then Senator Obama, not then Senator Hillary Clinton, not then Senator Joe Biden. So what's changed in a decade? We have a decade of exemplary service on the Court of Appeals that makes his nomination even stronger, but something else has changed, the politics of it. You know, it's interesting that a number of Democratic senators have talked about what they call dark money, organizations that are expressing free speech to share their views about Judge Gorsuch. There's an irony to the attack of my Democratic colleagues, because it is indeed because of dark money from corporations that we are seeing this Democratic filibuster. What explains the conduct here is simple. It is politics. And the politics are that in the Democratic Party, there are outside groups that are corporations, mind you, that are organized and formally incorporated, that are spending vast sums of money to organize left-wing activists to put political pressure on Senate Democrats. And it is that political pressure which is yielding the unprecedented result here. A Democratic senator some weeks ago told me, in a moment of candor, you got to understand, all of us on the Democratic side, we're afraid of being primaried from the left. We're afraid of doing anything other than opposing Trump on everything. That's what we're seeing playing out. It is the action of a handful of left-wing billionaires spending money to organize activists on the ground that are in effect holding Democratic senators hostage. Now that may be a reality of politics, an unfortunate reality of politics and where we are, but it is not a sound and principled reason to reject a Supreme Court justice who is unquestionably qualified and whose nomination enjoys the imprimatur of the American people voting in an election and choosing the kind of justice that should replace Justice Scalia. This week, the Senate, I am convinced, will confirm Judge Gorsuch as the next Associate Justice on the Supreme Court. And when that happens, that will be a victory for individual liberty. It will be a victory for the Constitution and Bill of Rights, and it will be a victory for the people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.